Thank you very much for your invitation to come here. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here because so many of you are working with refugee populations here in Turkey, and what I'm hearing and what I'm learning is really, really impressive. I think it is such important work, and I think that we also shouldn't lose sight of the fact of what a privilege it is for us to be able to be in a position where we might possibly be able to alleviate some of the distress these terribly traumatized populations are experiencing. So really not to forget the importance of working in this area. So I'm going to talk a little bit just, I suppose, to bring together some of the thoughts and things we've learned about today. This is an image that a young Afghan boy drew about his life so far when he came to England. So in line with the Farsi script, his life started here and went this way. And he talks about his life in Afghanistan and then the terrible 2-year journey it took for him to get to safety. But what I find striking about this is that the red, which I'm interpreting as the pain, we expect it to be present in these areas, but once you reach a country of refuge, that is a higher income country, as a place of destination, really these areas of red need to disappear, and we have a privilege, but a serious responsibility to ensure that we don't continue to perpetuate the difficulties and traumas that these young people had experienced. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the mental health needs, and I'll focus quickly on some ideas about interventions. So, as that picture showed, a lot of people think about the 3 different stages we need to think about of traumatic experiences before, when you're in a country of origin, during a journey to safety, and then having to settle, that all are equally important. And I think it's important to think of not only those 3 factors, but to move away from thinking about this child as a child entity, but a child living in a family, school context, community, society. So we need to be informing our thinking around interventions to think about all of these factors. And what do we know about refugee children? Well, there's marginalized children. So those of us that work in psychiatry and mental illness, we're dealing basically with the problems of marginalization, of deprivation as a whole. So refugee children have all of that, but alongside that, they've been forced to migrate, they've experienced persecution, all these traumas we've been hearing about earlier. And then for those who are unaccompanied, who don't have a primary caregiver, you have on top of that the loss of that primary caregiver and the contribution to resilience and long-term stability that primary caregiver often gives. So we also need to think that childhood is such an important stage. You have to learn so much in childhood. You have to develop physically, emotionally, cognitively, morally. All these things take place in a relatively short period of time, and when you're displaced and experience trauma, that can impact on all of these important things. So the needs for support, we need to think of not just about psychological support, but that if we're addressing psychological needs, we might need to be thinking about their education, their housing, the financial situation, that all of these are going to be contributing. So what do we know about prevalence? I'm not going to go over this too much, but basically the prevalence rates of refugee populations are higher than host populations, and that's really not rocket science, but predominantly in depression and the range of post-traumatic stress disorders. And it's greater for those that are unaccompanied. So I'll talk a little bit now about interventions. And what can we do? What in the world can we do? I think over the years it's been much easier to study what's happening and rates of disorder than actually about what to do. But I really think we have a responsibility and duty now to bring forward the discourse on interventions. So really to think about resilience, but also to think about what we can do. And I think all of you can contribute to this in an unbelievable way, because it's an embarrassment for someone like me to come from a country like England where we're literally accepting like 1 or 2 refugees a day, and the need and the capacity of Britain is that we could take thousands. and we've absolutely closed the door. So, I'm disgusted by this, but anyway, if we want to learn about what we can do and how we can help, it's people like you working in this country that can really take this forward and help us learn. So I don't want to look at the detail of the slide because I'll talk you through it. I did a review looking at community and school interventions for refugee children. And this is just to give you a taste of all the millions of different types of things that have been tried. So if we've got the intervention here, we've got interventions that deal with the past, or interventions that deal with the present and the future. We've got interventions that deal with trauma and the processing of traumatic events. And I have to say that all the evidence base lies here. But that's not because those are the most and only things you should do. That's because that's the easiest thing to study, and it has been studied. So the evidence base is there, but a lot of these other things have been done, but they don't yet have the evidence base to support them, and we need to build that evidence base. A lot of interventions around creativity in the arts, painting, drawing, music, drama. A lot around psychoeducation, so normalizing, teaching about stress reactions. A lot around self-soothing, a lot about how to build interpersonal skills. And then these interventions have been done for individuals, for families, and in groups. So really, the evidence lies in individuals with treating PTSD, but that's only because the rest of it hasn't been studied well. And I really say to you again, this is really an opportunity to study this. So I'm very interested in schools. Now I know this is a complex area in Turkey because so many different ways are being thought about of how to educate schools, or actually, as we saw in the camp, this is being dependent on volunteers. But my understanding is that over the next few years there's going to be a greater push to integrate in a forced manner these refugee children into Turkish schools. And if that is the case, I think that is a real opportunity to think, how can we work with these schools in a way to enhance the opportunity for these young children to integrate in a meaningful way. Almost all kids go to school, or have the opportunity to go to school. It can often be perceived as a safe place for families and children, and so can we do something to really enhance that opportunity? If they're going to go to schools, can we think in a more creative way about enhancing the mental health capacity of schools? Because, as we know, there definitely aren't going to be enough mental health workers in this field. We're never, ever, sadly, going to have enough of us. And so we have to think of more systemic ways to be delivering mental health interventions. And so let's see whether we can learn about what is the maximum way that we can work with schools. And I know that there are really interesting studies and ways of thinking with schools that are being done by people in this room. So there's a lot of learning and expertise, and we've got to build on it, we've got to study it, we've got to collaborate so that actually this will help children in the long term. So we did a very simple mental health service in Oxford. Again, our numbers are small. You can do much more important, useful things here. But what we did was we thought, let's bring a weekly support into schools so we can meet with the teachers that are taking on much of this work to discuss children. So obviously the last thing we want is for every single child to be referred to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or mental health services. That's not a sustainable way to develop services, and it's not necessarily what children need. What they might need is their environment to better understand what might be going on and how the environment can support them before we take the assumption that we need to see them. So we can do a lot to work with people working in these environments to understand and help and bring interventions. But with our service, if we decided that a child needed to be seen, then we would see them at school, rather than this really alien place that was a hospital, highly stigmatized, highly feared by many populations. And we'd often have, if there was a teacher at the school that was trusted, that person present in their room. So to assist in overcoming a lot of these barriers to accessing care. And the vast majority of young people we asked, 71% of them, preferred to be seen at school than elsewhere. And the reason mainly was because they felt that school was safe. It was also convenient. You could find the therapist easily. You could get to your lesson on time. But predominantly, it felt safe. And for those that didn't like to be seen at school, and there'll always be some that won't, this can't be something that addresses everyone's needs. It was mainly because of privacy. And it was calmer, and if you don't like school, then you're unlikely to like too many interventions in schools. So I thought I'd give you a little taster of something I've been working on recently, which is really about interventions. So I've been developing a toolbox to teach teachers, to give them some commonly used mental health skills. So this is a toolbox that I'm teaching in 1 2-hour session to teachers. So, you've got to do something that can be rolled out. If you're going to do something intensive for 5 days, that's just not going to be sustainable. So I've developed a toolbox of kind of 8 commonly used psychotherapy tools that we can give to teachers or anyone working in schools to use. So if anyone's interested, I'm happy to share all of this with you. I don't have any ownership of it. Let's just see if it's useful. So I'll give you an example of one. One's called MAPS. So it's to say to people working with refugee kids, draw a picture of a kid to build a map of their current support network. So what we get is a perception by all kids that absolutely nobody in the world cares about them, and they're completely isolated. It's kind of a common experience of adolescence anyway. But I think we need to work with the young people really to see if that's true. So for example, you put the name of a kid in the middle of a page. This is not rocket science. This is a commonly used thing in CBT type interventions. So to teach people working with kids, put a picture of the kid in the middle of the page, their name, and then draw around them who there is in their world. Is there anybody in their home environment that they trust? And put their names down. Is there anybody in their school environment, either peers or adults that they trust? Put it there. Is there anybody else? Now it might be that this is completely blank, and then you really know that you have to work to develop some networks. But it might be that there are some individuals that you can then help work with and build relationships with. So one is to just show the importance of social structures and mapping that for young people. The last one, I know we're tight of time, but I'll talk through one more if that's all right, is what I call a treasure box. So I think for me the problem is that you don't want to develop any sense of dependence on outside sources for these young people, because at any moment their life might change. They might leave the camp, they might flee, they might be taken, whatever it is. We know that these are unstable and insecure settings. So I thought, let's develop something to help a young person feel like they have everything they need within themselves. So I call it a treasure box. And the point of this box is to put into the box, how do I look after myself? Now I went on Google and I looked up treasure boxes, and I was looking for, one of those traditional images of a pirate with a massive chest. But then I saw this box, but it really doesn't matter what the box looks like. It can be imaginary, it can be whatever that young person wants. But it's a symbolic place, if it's not a physical place, where you put inside the things that help you. And then I go to the young person, I go, when you're getting angry, or whenever you're about to self-harm, or whatever it is that this young person is struggling with, what can you do to help yourself? So what have you tried in the past? And over time you could build into this treasure box skills and tools and things they need. So whether it's writing down the name of a person from their social system to go and talk to, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's playing with a friend, whether it's hitting a ball around a room. For each individual it's going to be different, whether it's music and listening to it. For everybody that's different. For each of us in this room it's different. But it would be nice to have a list of things that if they are, for example, taken away or in a different situation, they can close their eyes and imagine their treasure chest, or whatever is a more appropriate term to use, and think about the different things that they can put in it that will help them. And so it's about building the skills and the capacity and the strengths of these young people through whatever we can do. I like this box because, you've got your main one and then you've got these little hidden drawers that, when things are really, really bad, what are you going to take out? Now, I would put a bar of chocolate in there because that's me. Everyone is different, but you can work with them. And I think anyone can do this with a young person. I don't think we need to be skilled. And I just want to give a last note on the impact on the wider system. So, I don't think you should underestimate the importance of working in a focused manner with a group of highly vulnerable people, because it might have a big impact on the broader system in which you work on all Turkish children. So, for example, in Oxford, because we worked with schools, with these refugee kids, what the school said is, this is really useful. We actually need this for all kids. And because of this now, services in Oxfordshire have completely changed, and when we had no formal relationship with schools, now every single school in Oxford, secondary school, has a member of mental health services going into the school for half a day every single week. So the learning from a small group can transform services for the whole group. Don't underestimate the importance of it. And the same with narrative exposure therapy, which is a therapeutic intervention for PTSD that I'm very interested in, I'm a great proponent of, was developed for refugee camp settings. It's a simple training, it's 2 days for mental health workers. It's an unbelievably good treatment. It's relatively brief, it takes about 10 sessions to get someone through multiple traumatic PTSD sequelae. But because this is actually quite a quick, effective treatment, what's happened is now this is being rolled out across our trauma centres in the UK for all people experiencing PTSD. So again, an example of something developed in low resource settings for highly vulnerable populations can change the way in which we work with everybody. So not to underestimate the importance of that. So in conclusion, these are isolated, insecure young people. They're longing for acceptance. We need to help them build their support networks within the local society. They cannot remain isolated. And if there is a move for these Syrian children, for example, in Turkey, to be integrated in Turkish schools, we could really play an important role in facilitating that and highlighting the importance of it. I'm just rushing through. Sorry, I don't know why that's happening, but nothing to do with me. Okay, so I'll end there. Just with a note of thanks to you for your time. Please, if any of you are interested in working with this group, if there's any way that I can help, please do contact me. I would be very, very interested in that.